Would you feel safe sharing a train journey with a stranger? Yes or no? Comment down below now. What unfolds when luxury, secrecy, and violence collide inside a train compartment? The Plymouth Express is more than a straightforward murder tale. It is a tightly constructed puzzle where silence speaks louder than words and every detail hides a clue. A woman boards a train, never to arrive at her destination, her body later found concealed beneath a seat. Her past, marked by debts, secrets, and dangerous entanglements, casts long shadows over the case. With Hercule Poirot leading the inquiry, the truth comes out piece by piece, through calm reasoning and sharp observation rather than spectacle. This is a mystery where appearances deceive, where wealth masks motive, and elegance hides the hand of danger. Why did she change her plans at the last moment? Who was the stranger in her carriage? And what kind of murderer would choose such a public stage for their crime? Just when the answer seems clear, Christie delivers a twist that leaves you questioning everything. Subscribe, reason. If you enjoy classic mysteries retold with fresh narration and analysis, subscribe now. You won't miss the next case that keeps you guessing until the very last page. Let's start the story. Scene 1. A journey interrupted. The chill of December lingered over Newton Abbot Station as Lieutenant Alex Simpson stepped off the platform and into the snug interior of a first-class carriage on the Plymouth Express. A porter trailed behind him, struggling with a weighty suitcase. As the man made to stow it on the overhead rack, Simpson interjected with a firm but polite gesture. "Leave it on the seat. Thank you. I'll manage from here." The soldier slipped him a generous tip, earning a grateful nod before the porter hurried off. All along the train, doors slammed shut in quick succession. A guard's booming call echoed down the platform. "Plymouth only! Change at the next stop for Plymouth connections!" A sharp whistle split the air, and the express lurched into motion, gathering speed as it glided out of the station. Left in solitude, Simpson instinctively drew the window closed against the biting wind. But almost immediately he frowned, wrinkling his nose at a faint, unpleasant odor that stirred an uneasy memory. He had smelled it before, during his convalescence after surgery on his leg, the sharp tang of chloroform. Uneasy, he quickly reopened the window, allowing the night air to sweep away the scent. Settling into a seat that faced the locomotive, he drew a pipe from his coat pocket and struck a match. For a while, he smoked in silence, his gaze fixed on the deepening twilight that pressed against the carriage glass. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against the rails lulled him into a kind of reflective calm. Eventually, he stirred. Opening his suitcase, Simpson withdrew a handful of papers and magazines before attempting to slide the case beneath the opposite seat. To his annoyance, the suitcase caught awkwardly, refusing to fit. He shoved again, harder this time. Still no movement. Muttering under his breath, he tried once more, but something solid and unyielding blocked the way. With growing irritation, he pulled the case back out and bent low to peer into the shadowed space beneath the seat. What he saw made his blood run cold. Simpson recoiled with a strangled cry of horror. His shout echoed down the corridor, and moments later, the piercing screech of the emergency brake jolted the train to a standstill. Far from the commotion, in the warmth of his London apartment, Hercule Poirot regarded me with his usual composure. "Mon ami," he said, his voice calm yet deliberate, "I imagine you have already heard whispers of the disturbing events aboard the Plymouth Express." With that, he handed me a folded note, delivered with his customary elegance. The message was brief and formal. "Dear Sir, I shall be obliged if you will call upon me at your earliest convenience. Yours faithfully, Ebenezer Halliday." The name pricked my memory, though I could not immediately place it. Poirot, noting my hesitation, lifted a newspaper from the table and began to read aloud in his precise, accented tones. A shocking discovery was made late last evening. A naval officer traveling toward Plymouth stumbled upon the body of a young woman concealed beneath the seat of his compartment. She had been stabbed through the heart. Upon the dreadful realization, the officer pulled the communication cord, bringing the train to an abrupt halt. The victim, richly dressed and apparently in her early 30s, was at first unidentified. Later, she was revealed to be the Honourable Mrs. Rupert Carrington, known before her marriage as Flossie Halliday, daughter of Ebenezer Halliday, the American steel magnate. Poirot folded the paper neatly and fixed me with his sharp gaze. "Now, mon ami, do you see the link, or must I guide you further?" As I pondered, Poirot leaned back, his eyes gleaming with recollection. "I once assisted Halliday in a matter involving missing bearer bonds, an intricate affair. I recall Flossie as a lively young woman in Paris during the visit of royalty. They called her La Petite Pensionnaire. She had a substantial dowry, which, as you can imagine, attracted every variety of fortune hunter. Indeed, I remember one such adventurer, a certain Comte de la Rochefort, an unscrupulous charmer who nearly ensnared her with smooth words and false promises. Luckily, her father intervened in time, whisking her back to America before lasting harm was done." Poirot's tone grew somber as he added, "Some years later, I heard she married Carrington. And now, it seems, her story has reached its tragic conclusion, alone, on a December night, in the shadows of a moving train." Scene 2. The case takes shape. "To be candid with you, Poirot," I admitted, "I know very little about her husband." Poirot gave a delicate shrug, his expression revealing a hint of disdain. "The Honourable Robert Carrington," he said slowly, "is not a gentleman to inspire admiration. By every account, he frittered away the last of his inheritance through gambling, poor investments, and idle extravagances. The fortune of Mr. Halliday's daughter likely arrived just in time to rescue him from ruin." Poirot's voice grew sharper as he leaned forward. "You will not find a man more polished in manners and appearance, yet beneath that elegance lies something far less honourable. He is charming, yes, but shallow. A predator, if you will, drawn not by love but by wealth. It was her money, not her person, that held him fast. Their marriage, as I gather, began to crumble almost the moment the vows were spoken." He folded his arms, his dark eyes narrowing. "I have even heard whispers of a formal separation being prepared. But," he added with emphasis, "Halliday is no fool. He most certainly placed his daughter's fortune beyond her husband's reckless grasp." Poirot's moustache twitched as he lowered his voice. "Even so, Robert Carrington is now said to be nearly penniless." I raised an eyebrow. "You suspect him, then?" Poirot lifted a cautioning finger. "Non, non, mon ami. Do not run ahead. We must never leap to conclusions. Still," his eyes gleamed with quiet interest, "it is a thread worth following. For now, let us call upon Mr. Halliday. He will provide us with the details we need." Within minutes, we had taken a taxi through the rush of London streets to Park Lane, where the wealthy American magnate had rented an imposing house. Its grand facade and heavy stonework spoke of money newly acquired but confidently displayed. We were ushered into a splendid library lined with gleaming wood and shelves of leather-bound volumes. Before long, the master of the house strode in. Ebenezer Halliday was a man of striking presence, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, with a jutting chin and a thick moustache that bristled like a challenge. His eyes, sharp and commanding, settled on Poirot at once. "Mr. Poirot," he said briskly, I needn't waste time explaining why I summoned you. You've read the papers. My daughter is gone. Scotland Yard is doing what it can, but I want another man on the case, a man with discretion and results. I remembered your fine work with those bearer bonds. Money is no object. I earned every dollar for her, and now that she's been taken from me—" His voice faltered for the briefest moment before hardening again. "I will spend my last cent to see the villain caught. Do you understand me?" Poirot bowed his head respectfully. "Monsieur, I accept your commission most willingly, especially as I had the honor of meeting your daughter in Paris. She was most gracious. Now, if you please, I would hear every particular of her journey. Even the smallest detail may hold significance." Halliday nodded, gathering his thoughts. To begin with, she was not bound for Plymouth at all. Her true destination was Ainsdale Court, the estate of the Duchess of Swansea. There was to be a weekend gathering, filled with dances and formal entertainments. She boarded the 12:14 train from Paddington. It runs direct to Bristol before continuing westward to Weston, Taunton, Exeter, and Newton Abbot. Poirot interjected softly, "And she travelled alone?" "Yes, she had reserved a first-class compartment through to Bristol. Her maid, Jane Mason, was placed in a third-class carriage just behind. My daughter carried with her nearly all of her finest jewels, worth, I would estimate, close to $100,000. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "A considerable fortune, monsieur. Who was entrusted with their care?" "The maid." "No," Halliday replied firmly. "Flossie always managed her jewels herself. She carried the Morocco leather case in her handbag." He paused, his brow tightening. "At Bristol, the maid followed instructions as usual. She left the train, took her mistress's dressing bag and wraps, and approached the compartment door, expecting to assist her. But Flossie told her she would not be alighting there after all. She instructed Mason to put the luggage in the cloakroom and wait in the tea room for her return." Poirot's eyes grew thoughtful, his fingers tapping lightly against the arm of his chair. "Curious," he murmured. "Already the puzzle presents many twists." The faintest smile touched his lips. "And it is only the beginning." Scene 3. Shadows in the train compartment. The room was quiet, except for the faint ticking of a clock when Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with interest. "Your daughter was meant to alight at Bristol, was she not?" he asked gently. Mr. Halliday gave a heavy nod. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. She told her maid, Jane Mason, to wait for her there. Flossie promised she would return on an up train later that afternoon. Naturally, Mason was bewildered by this sudden alteration in plans, but she did exactly as she was told." The detective tilted his head, fingers steepled as he listened. "Mason followed her instructions," Halliday continued. "She deposited the luggage in the cloakroom and went to the refreshment room for tea. But my daughter never reappeared. The trains came and went. Each time the maid waited anxiously, and each time she was disappointed. At last, when the very last up train had arrived without Flossie stepping off, she had no choice but to abandon hope. She booked a hotel nearby and stayed the night." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And it was only the next morning, after reading the dreadful news in the newspaper, that she returned to London?" "Precisely," Halliday said, his voice heavy with grief. "She caught the earliest train she could find." The little Belgian tapped his fingers on the armrest thoughtfully. "Tell me, monsieur, was there any earlier sign, any indication whatsoever, that your daughter might suddenly change her travel plans?" Halliday hesitated before replying. "None, except there is one detail Mason noticed. When she approached the compartment at Bristol, Flossie was no longer sitting alone." Poirot leaned in. "Ah? Someone was with her?" Yes, Halliday confirmed grimly. A man was already inside. He had his back to the maid, staring out of the window. Mason could not see his face clearly, but she is positive about his presence. And this was a corridor train, of course? Poirot pressed. Yes, with the corridor on the platform side. Flossie stepped into it briefly to speak to Mason. The maid is adamant about that. Poirot's eyes flickered with irritation when he noticed an inkstand on the desk was slightly out of alignment. With a swift, almost compulsive movement, he rose, adjusted it until it was perfectly centered, and then returned to his chair. "Pardon, monsieur," he said softly. "My mind functions best when order is restored." He resumed his questioning smoothly. "You believe then that this man, the stranger in the carriage, was the reason your daughter so abruptly abandoned her original plan?" Halliday exhaled slowly, his features tight. "It is the only explanation that makes sense, and yet—" He faltered, something uneasy flickering across his expression before shaking his head. "No, I cannot say who he was." Poirot nodded gravely and shifted the conversation. "Now, about the discovery of the body." Halliday's tone darkened. "It was a young naval officer who found her. He was traveling on the same train and raised the alarm at once. Luckily, there was a doctor aboard. He examined her and determined she had been first chloroformed into unconsciousness, then stabbed through the heart. She had likely been dead for nearly 4 hours when discovered." Poirot's eyes grew sharp. "So the fatal attack must have occurred not long after the train left Bristol, between there and Weston, or perhaps Weston and Taunton." "Exactly," Halliday replied bitterly. "And what's more, the jewel case she carried was gone, vanished completely." The detective's eyes glimmered. "And her fortune? Who inherits that now?" Halliday's jaw tightened. "Flossie made a will soon after her marriage, leaving everything to her husband." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Despite your low opinion of him?" "I didn't know what kind of man he truly was back then," Halliday admitted heavily. "But later, I saw clearly. Robert Carrington is a thoroughly unscrupulous fellow. I had long urged Flossie to separate from him, and at last she agreed. Proceedings had already been set in motion. Her fortune was settled in a trust. He could not touch it while she lived." He paused, voice grim. "Even so, he kept demanding money, and too often she gave in quietly to prevent scandal. But I had resolved to put an end to it. She was finally ready to be free of him." Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. "And Monsieur Carrington himself? He is in London?" "Yes. He returned last night from the country." The detective nodded, filing the information away. "Très bien. I believe I have learned enough from you for now, but I should like to speak to Jane Mason directly." Halliday rang for a footman, who departed and returned moments later with the maid. Jane Mason entered, her figure sturdy, and her face a mask of calm professionalism. Poirot addressed her gently. "Mademoiselle, I hope you will not mind answering a few questions. Tell me, did your mistress seem her usual self before the journey?" "Oh yes, sir," Jane replied crisply. "Quite herself that morning, calm, in good spirits. Nothing unusual at all. But once we reached Bristol, everything changed. She was unsettled, pale, nervous, as though she had been shaken by something sudden." Poirot nodded slowly. "And her words?" Jane thought for a moment. She said, "I've had to change my plans. Something's come up. I won't be getting off here after all. Please put the luggage in the cloakroom." The detective leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting, arranging themselves into a strange pattern. Yet the whole picture remained elusive, like a shadowed figure glimpsed through a misted window. Scene 4. threads of deception. Jane Mason sat across from Poirot, her composure steady despite the strain of the questioning. "She asked me to wait at the station for her return," she explained softly. "I remember asking, 'Shall I remain here, ma'am?' And she nodded, saying yes, but added that it might be quite late before she came back. It was unusual, very unlike her, but I didn't dare press for an explanation." Poirot tilted his head thoughtfully, his sharp gaze resting on the maid. "And yet, it struck you as odd, did it not?" "It did, sir," Mason admitted. "I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She seemed unsettled, almost as though she was leaning on someone else's decision." "And this someone—" Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You suspect it was the gentleman in the carriage with her?" The maid's eyes flickered, recalling the moment. "Yes. She never spoke to him while I was present, but I noticed the way she glanced back at him, almost like she was silently asking for reassurance. It was as though she wanted to be certain she was making the right choice." Poirot's expression sharpened. "And yet you never saw his face?" "No, monsieur," Mason replied. "He kept his back to me the whole time. I could only describe his figure, tall and slim, with dark hair visible beneath a tweed traveling cap. He wore a light-colored overcoat, nothing that drew much attention. I do not believe I had ever seen him before." Poirot pressed delicately, his voice even. "And you are confident it was not your employer, Mr. Carrington?" Mason hesitated, her brow furrowing. "The build was similar, perhaps, but I cannot say with certainty. We rarely saw Mr. Carrington. He was distant and seldom around. Still, something in me felt it wasn't him." Poirot, never one to ignore the smallest hint, bent briefly to retrieve a pin from the carpet, examining it as if it might hold meaning before setting it aside. Straightening, he resumed smoothly. "Could this man have boarded at Bristol, just before you entered the carriage?" The maid considered the question carefully. "It's possible, yes. My own carriage was overcrowded, and it took me time to disembark. The platform was crowded, and in the confusion, he could have slipped into her compartment unnoticed, though in truth, I thought he had entered through the corridor. It seemed more natural that way." Poirot accepted the possibility with a short nod, then asked, "And what of her attire? How was she dressed that day?" Mason's reply came readily. "She wore her white fox fur, with a vivid blue coat and matching skirt, an electric blue, the kind that catches the eye instantly. Over her face, she had a white veil dotted with black. She looked striking. Anyone who saw her would have remembered her." Mr. Halliday, who had been silent until now, added gravely, "The police hope her clothing will help identify the place where she was last seen alive. A woman dressed so finely would not pass unnoticed." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been of assistance." He dismissed the maid, and when the door closed behind her, his eyes returned to Halliday. His tone sharpened, calm, but unyielding. "Monsieur, I must ask again. Have you truly told me all there is to tell? Every single fact regarding your daughter?" Halliday stiffened defensively. "I have told you everything, Monsieur Poirot. There is nothing more." Poirot's eyes glimmered with quiet certainty. "Non, monsieur. There is something withheld, and without the truth, I cannot proceed." There was a silence, taut with unspoken weight. At last Halliday gave a weary sigh, slipped a hand into his pocket, and drew out a folded letter. His voice was low, almost resigned. "Perhaps this is what you are seeking, though I cannot imagine how you guessed." Poirot accepted the letter with a slight bow. The handwriting inside was graceful, unmistakably foreign. its words dripping with passion. He read aloud, "Chère Madame, it is with boundless delight that I look forward to our reunion, following your gracious reply. How cruel fate is that you must depart from London tomorrow. But be assured, our meeting will not be long delayed. The memory of Paris still burns bright in my heart, and soon I shall once more behold the lady whose image rules my soul." The signature was bold, flamboyant, Armand de la Roche. Poirot folded the letter with care and handed it back. "I take it you were unaware, monsieur, that your daughter had renewed acquaintance with this Comte de la Roche." Halliday's jaw tightened. "Not in the least. Discovering that letter among her belongings was a shock. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, this man is no gentleman. He is an adventurer, a charlatan of the worst sort." Poirot's gaze lingered on him, thoughtful and unwavering. The veil of mystery was beginning to lift, but what it revealed promised to be darker still. Scene 5. The trap is set. The moment felt taut, like a wire pulled to breaking point. Holliday's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, astonishment heavy in his voice. "But how in the world could you have known about that letter?" Poirot's lips curved into one of his quiet, amused smiles. "Ah, monsieur, that is the trick. I did not know in the literal sense. But a detective's duty is not only to examine footprints or compare cigarette ash under a magnifying glass. Those things are but the surface. The true art lies far deeper, in the psychology of those involved." He leaned back, fingertips pressed together as though balancing invisible weights. "You see, monsieur, I realized you never truly trusted your son-in-law. In fact, there is resentment, even dislike. In your heart, you believed him quite capable of taking advantage of your daughter's death. And yet, despite the maid's account describing a man whose appearance resembled him, you did not pursue this suspicion. Why not? Because your mind was already fixed elsewhere. You had formed another belief and were holding it close." Holliday let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. The fight seemed to drain from him like air leaving a balloon. "You're right, Poirot. I was certain Robert was guilty. His behavior, his debts, his manner, it all seemed to explain the tragedy. But when I found that letter, I faltered. It unsettled me." Poirot's eyes gleamed, sharp and intent. "Yes, the Count's words, before very long, and perhaps sooner than you think, they spoke of urgency. A man writing in that tone would not wait days or weeks. He would act at once. He would make his presence felt before anyone suspected he had returned. Therefore, he must have boarded the train from London at 12:40, slipping unseen into your daughter's carriage through the corridor." Holliday nodded grimly. "The Count de la Rochefort is, as you say, tall, dark-haired. The maid's description fits him perfectly." Poirot rose, brushing a speck of lint from his immaculate sleeve. "Well then, monsieur, I take my leave. I imagine Scotland Yard already has details of the missing jewels." "Yes," Holliday confirmed. "In fact, Inspector Japp is here now, if you'd like a word with him." Almost on cue, Inspector Japp entered with his usual mixture of brusque affection and playful mockery. "Still ticking away, eh, Poirot? Those little grey cells of yours haven't worn out yet?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "They function excellently, my good Japp." "Glad to hear it," Japp replied with a half-smile. "Now then, what's your opinion? Young Robert, or some seasoned crook? We're combing the usual fencing haunts. Whoever grabbed those jewels won't be sentimental enough to keep them." "And Mr. Carrington?" Poirot asked lightly. Japp rubbed the back of his neck. "That's still foggy. His account of yesterday is vague. I've got a man trailing him now, but it may be too late to catch anything useful." Poirot tilted his head in approval, though his tone carried a subtle warning. A sensible precaution, but perhaps, mon ami, one taken a day too late. Japp chuckled, shaking his head. You never change, Poirot. Always the sly fox. Anyway, I'm off. Paddington, Bristol, Weston-super-Mare. That's the trail. I'll check back later. Bon voyage, mon ami, Poirot called cheerfully after him. When the inspector had gone, he turned back to me with a sigh. Our friend Japp is indefatigable in his way, measuring footprints, collecting ashes, tracking mud, always in motion. But when one mentions psychology, he smiles indulgently, thinking, poor old Poirot, he grows fanciful. These modern detectives knock so loudly at the door, they fail to see that it is already open. Curiosity burned in me, and I asked eagerly what he would do next. Poirot gave a small shrug, his smile faint but knowing. Since we have reached a crossroads, I shall spend 3 pennies on a telephone call to the Ritz, where our elusive Count was last seen. After that, I shall retire to my rooms, for my shoes are damp, I have sneezed twice, and a tisane brewed over the spirit lamp will benefit me far more than chasing about the countryside. I did not see him again until the following morning. When I entered, Poirot was finishing his breakfast, perfectly calm as ever. My impatience nearly spilled over. Well, I asked quickly, what news? Nothing of significance, he answered lightly. The Count is gone. Gone? But how? He left the Ritz the day before yesterday, the very day of the murder. Then surely that clears Carrington. If the Count left London, he cannot— Poirot's sharp glance silenced me. You are too quick, mon ami. The Count's disappearance does not mean the case is finished. On the contrary, it means he must be traced, and quite possibly arrested. The words lingered in the air like a shadow, warning that the game was far from over. Scene 6. Resolution and reflection. But what reason could he possibly have? Hastings asked, his brows knit in deep thought. Poirot, ever composed, folded his hands neatly. Ah, mon ami, one must never underestimate the power of temptation. A fortune of nearly $100,000 in jewels is enough to lure many into folly. Yet to my mind, the theft itself is not the enigma. What fascinates me is this: why go so far as to commit murder? The jewels could have been taken without bloodshed. He let the words hang in the air before continuing, his voice gentler now. Consider Mrs. Carrington. She once cared deeply for this man. Do you truly believe she would have pressed charges against him for theft alone? No. A woman wounded in love often prefers silence to scandal. She would have borne the loss rather than destroy him publicly. And our Count, who prides himself on his understanding of women, must have known this truth. He has built his career, even his survival, on studying sentiment and exploiting it. Poirot leaned forward slightly. But let us ask ourselves, if Robert Carrington were the murderer, why would he take the jewels as well? To do so would place suspicion squarely upon his shoulders, unless the theft was nothing more than a clever distraction to cloud the real crime. Just then, a brisk knock rattled the door. Poirot's lips curved in a small smile. That will be Inspector Japp. The inspector stepped in, cheerful and brimming with energy. Good morning, Poirot. I've just returned, and I've got developments to share. Poirot inclined his head serenely. And I, too, have arranged my thoughts. Japp chuckled, shaking his head. Still the same as ever, sitting in a chair, letting the world turn until it all makes sense. That's not how we youngsters solve cases anymore. He turned to Hastings with a playful grin, before growing serious again. Well then, ready to hear what I've found? Poirot's eyes sparkled. Permit me a guess, Inspector. You discovered the murder weapon. a knife thrown aside near the railway between Weston and Taunton. And naturally, you questioned the newspaper seller who recalled Mrs. Carrington at Weston Station. Japp's jaw dropped. Now, hang on. Don't tell me those confounded little grey cells of yours are at work again. Poirot only bowed his head modestly. It is a matter of understanding human behavior, that is all. Tell me, did she leave the boy a gratuity? She did indeed, Japp replied with a grin. Half a crown. No wonder he remembered her. She called him over, bought 2 magazines, and even pointed out the girl in blue on the cover, saying, "That looks like me." He's not forgotten her since. Just so, Poirot nodded. And according to the doctor's account, the time of death must have been before Taunton, yes? Exactly, Japp confirmed. That's why I searched the lines straight away and found the knife tossed aside. As for Taunton, too many people, too much confusion. If our fellow passed through, he blended into the crowd. My bet is he took a later train back to London. Poirot murmured thoughtfully. Quite possible. But Japp's tone shifted, lowering his voice. Here's the bigger piece of news. The stolen emerald. It's already turned up at a pawnbroker's. Poirot raised a curious brow. And who was bold enough to sell it? Red Nye, Japp answered grimly. You know the man. Short, violent, notorious jewel thief. He's usually in league with a woman. Gracie Kidd, if memory serves. This time she's vanished, maybe slipped to Holland with the rest of the loot. We've got Nye in custody, but he's tight-lipped about his partner. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps I can save you the trouble of finding her, Inspector. Japp snorted. Another one of your brainwaves, eh? Funny how you always manage it, still pulling rabbits out of hats at your age. Poirot offered a thin smile. Perhaps, mon ami. Or perhaps it is simply luck. The 3 men stepped out into the rain, Poirot buttoning his coat tightly. Hastings, we mustn't undo the curative effect of our tisane. Let us not catch cold. Soon, they were riding through the damp streets in a taxi bound for Park Lane. At Halliday's residence, Poirot ascended swiftly to the top floor. In a neat, unassuming room, his sharp eyes fell upon a black trunk. Kneeling, he inspected the labels before deftly producing a length of wire. Pray fetch Mr. Halliday, he said over his shoulder while working the lock. Within moments, the startled Halliday appeared in the doorway. Poirot, what in heaven's name is this intrusion? Poirot rose slowly, holding up a neatly folded set of garments. A woman's blue dress and coat, along with a white fox stole. I believe, monsieur, that I have found precisely what I came for. Before Halliday could respond, the maid, Jane Mason, entered quietly. Poirot turned to Hastings. Close the door, my friend, and stand with your back against it. Then, with the flair of a man delivering the final act of a performance, he announced, Monsieur Halliday, allow me to present to you not your loyal maid, but none other than Miss Gracie Kidd, known accomplice of Red Nye. She is to be escorted into custody forthwith. Poirot dusted his hands and sat back calmly. The explanation, as always, is quite simple. I asked myself, why did the maid describe Mrs. Carrington's outfit with such precision? The answer, because her scheme relied upon being remembered. Only she claimed to have seen a strange man at Bristol. The doctor's testimony allowed for an earlier time of death, and so I reasoned. What if Mrs. Carrington never reached Bristol at all? He glanced at Jane Mason. You see, she donned her mistress's distinctive clothing, easy to recall, and played the part. At Weston, she ensured notice, tipping the newsboy extravagantly and pointing out her blue attire. After casting the knife aside along the railway, she hid her disguise beneath a long coat and slipped off at Taunton. At Bristol, she retrieved the luggage, spent the night at a hotel, as she later claimed, and returned to London the following day. A neat deception, but not neat enough. "And the Count?" Hastings asked quietly. Poirot shook his head firmly. "No, he would never have dared. The Count is a coward at heart. He values his life and freedom far too highly to hazard it on murder." Halliday, pale and shaken, managed a strained smile. "Poirot, I cannot begin to thank you. You've spared me disgrace, even ruin. No check I write could possibly repay you." Poirot merely leaned toward Hastings, his moustache twitching with amusement. "Let the inspector enjoy his glory, mon ami. Between you and me, I rather think I've stolen his thunder. As the Americans say, I have got his goat." And with that, the case was closed. Scene-by-scene breakdown of Agatha Christie's The Plymouth Express. Scene 1. A journey cut short. The tale begins aboard the luxurious Plymouth Express, where Mrs. Rupert Carrington, an elegant but troubled woman, boards for what should have been a simple trip. Yet, when the train arrives, she is conspicuously absent. Soon after, the dreadful discovery is made, her lifeless body hidden beneath the seat of a first-class compartment. What should have been a routine journey of refinement and comfort is shattered by the chilling reality of murder. Christie immediately reminds us that appearances of safety, like the polished sheen of a luxury train, are fragile illusions. Even in the most ordinary settings, danger can lurk quietly, waiting for its moment. Moral reflection: security is never absolute. Even the most comfortable environments can become arenas of vulnerability. Viewer question: when you travel, do you instinctively trust the environment, or do you stay alert to hidden risks? Scene 2. The case unfolds. Hercule Poirot, with his unmatched precision, steps in to investigate. He quickly learns that Mrs. Carrington's personal life was far from serene. Her wealthy father and her estranged husband both hold pieces of the puzzle, though neither offers clarity. Her sudden change in travel plans raises further suspicion, hinting that more was at play than mere coincidence. Poirot, ever attentive, notices subtle cracks in their stories and begins following the money trail. For Christie, motives are rarely clean. They're entangled in greed, resentment, and broken trust. Moral reflection: relationships built on wealth instead of respect are destined to corrode. Viewer question: would you trust someone who seemed more interested in your bank account than in your company? Scene 3. The compartment speaks. Poirot directs his attention to the train itself, the silent witness to the crime. He reconstructs the victim's last moments, from her appearance on the platform to her unseen death within the carriage. A passenger recalls spotting a man leaving the compartment in haste, but the figure remains elusive. To Poirot, the train is more than steel and upholstery. It is a diary of overlooked details. Every handbag, every footprint, every hurried glance becomes a possible clue. In this narrow space, the truth is waiting to be read by eyes sharp enough to see it. Moral reflection: often it is the smallest, most ordinary details that speak the loudest truths. Viewer question: in your daily life, how much do you actually notice when observing strangers around you? Scene 4. Deceptions revealed. As the investigation deepens, Poirot uncovers webs of deceit, false names, disguised identities, and a cunning plan to conceal theft. The victim had withdrawn valuable jewels before boarding the train, yet they are missing without a trace. Suspicion naturally falls on her husband, a man with a tarnished reputation and a love for fast living. Yet Poirot senses another layer beyond simple greed. Emotional betrayal often intertwines with financial schemes, making the wound even sharper. Moral reflection: greed rarely arrives alone. It drags betrayal and heartbreak alongside it. Viewer question: which betrayal do you think cuts deeper? Losing trust in love or losing trust in money? Scene 5. The elegant trap. Poirot knows that logic alone won't flush the murderer out. Human weakness must do the work. With calculated patience, he sets a trap involving the missing jewels. The scheme is simple, yet devilishly effective. Under the pressure of exposure, the culprit reveals themselves not through what they confess, but in how they behave when cornered. Moral reflection. Truth often surfaces under stress, when pretenses crack and masks fall away. Viewer question: do you believe stress makes people more truthful or more reckless? Scene 6. Justice without celebration. At last, the murderer is unmasked, and Poirot's methodical genius is proven once more. Yet the conclusion is not triumphant. Justice has been served, but Mrs. Carrington remains gone, her attempt at freedom ending in betrayal. Poirot, calm and composed, takes no joy in the outcome. For him, justice is duty, not celebration. Moral reflection. Truth brings justice, but justice cannot always heal the scars left behind. Viewer question: do you think justice alone is enough, or must it be paired with compassion to feel complete? Let's discuss key characters. At the center of this mystery stands Mrs. Rupert Carrington, formerly Flossie Halliday. She is a wealthy woman whose glamorous life hides an unhappy marriage and dangerous choices. Her sudden and brutal death aboard the Plymouth Express sets the entire case in motion, leaving behind unanswered questions about loyalty, greed, and betrayal. Her husband, Rupert Carrington, is a man who lives far beyond his means. Known for his lavish spending and questionable morals, he becomes an immediate suspect. His debts and desperation form a shadow over the investigation, raising the uncomfortable question: did financial ruin drive him to murder? Then there is Mr. Ebenezer Halliday, Flossie's father, a self-made American millionaire. Fierce, pragmatic, and grieving, he refuses to let his daughter's death become another unsolved crime. It is he who seeks out Hercule Poirot, demanding not just answers, but justice, no matter how painful the truth may be. Presiding over it all is Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective. With his calm demeanor and razor-sharp reasoning, he untangles the web of deception with patience and precision. Poirot does not rush. Instead, he listens, observes, and reconstructs the truth from fragments that others overlook. Beside him is Captain Hastings, friend, confidant, and narrator of the case. His role is more than just companion. Hastings gives voice to the questions the reader or listener might ask, grounding Poirot's extraordinary mind with practical human insight. Around them orbit a handful of secondary figures: the Carrington's maid, whose testimony about Mrs. Carrington's last movements becomes vital in piecing together the timeline, and the railway guard and station porters, whose small but important observations help confirm identities, timings, and suspicious behaviors. Though their parts may seem minor, each detail they contribute sharpens Poirot's deductions. My final reflections. The Plymouth Express is a story that thrives on economy, both in setting and in design. The moving train is not just a backdrop, but a metaphor. It propels the mystery forward with unstoppable momentum, carrying both the victim and the clues toward their inevitable conclusion. What makes this tale fascinating is its deceptive simplicity. There are no extravagant disguises or dramatic confrontations. Instead, Christie relies on subtle misdirection, emotional tension, and the ordinariness of routine travel. A woman is murdered not in some shadowy alley, but in the comfort of first-class luxury. proof that danger often hides in plain sight. At its heart, the story examines the destructive power of greed and desperation. Love soured by financial ruin, respectability masking corruption, and truth concealed behind carefully constructed appearances. All of these are themes that resonate far beyond the pages of the story. Poirot's resolution feels inevitable, not because it is predictable, but because it aligns perfectly with Christie's recurring truth. Evil is often clothed in charm and privilege, and only through relentless observation does justice emerge. If this case gripped you, don't stop here. Explore more of Poirot's adventures where the smallest clue can overturn an entire theory. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another classic mystery. Share this story with fellow Christie fans and let us know your thoughts below. Who did you suspect before the truth was revealed? Trivia. Question for viewers. In the Plymouth Express, Christie uses the confined space of the train to heighten tension. Do you think this story would work as effectively if it was set in a grand country house instead? Why or why not?